Somewhere in southern France, about 60,000 years ago, a Neanderthal died. And when the people around them buried the body, they placed something in the grave. Not a weapon, not food, not a tool. A fossil. A smooth spiral shell from a creature that had been dead for 350 million years. The Neanderthal had no word for that, no concept for it, no category in their mind for extinct marine organism from the Devonian period. They just knew the object was strange, and they buried it with their dead anyway. That's the question this video is actually about. Not what fossils are, but why, across thousands of years, across dozens of unconnected civilizations, humans kept picking them up. Here's how we know this wasn't accidental. Fossils don't just wander into graves. They don't accidentally travel 200 miles from the nearest cliff where they occurred naturally. But that's exactly what archaeologists keep finding. At a site in Arcy-sur-Cure in France, Neanderthals collected fossil shells and perforated them. They were worn as ornaments. At Paviland Cave in Wales, a burial over 33,000 years old contained a deliberately placed perforated shell fossil. At multiple Upper Paleolithic sites across Europe, researchers have found fossils grouped together with ochre, with beads, with tools that were clearly significant. None of these fossils were found where they naturally occur in the ground. They were carried, curated, kept. In some cases, the nearest natural deposit of that fossil type was over 200 kilometers away. That's not scavenging, that's collecting. So the question isn't whether early humans cared about fossils. The question is, what did they think they were? Try to picture the world these people lived in. No geology, no concept of deep time, no paleontology, no evolutionary biology, no understanding that the Earth had layers or that those layers took millions of years to form. The idea that the planet was billions of years old wouldn't be seriously proposed until the 1700s, and even then it was scandalous. So what does a fossil look like if you have none of that? You find a stone, but the stone has a perfect spiral inside it, or the precise imprint of a leaf, or the unmistakable shape of a giant tooth, larger than any living animal you've ever seen. It looks like something made it. It looks like something lived inside it. It looks like evidence. The human brain, then, exactly as now, is a pattern recognition machine. And when it encounters a pattern it cannot explain with available knowledge, it doesn't shut down. It generates a story. Here's where it gets strange. Cultures that had absolutely no contact with each other, separated by oceans, by thousands of years, by entirely different languages and religions, looked at the same fossils and reached remarkably similar conclusions. In ancient China, dinosaur bones were identified as dragon bones. The Chinese word for dinosaur, translated literally, means terrible dragon. Dragon bone powder was used medicinally for centuries. Traders sold it, physicians prescribed it. The supply chain for dragon bones was well organized and serious. In ancient Greece, enormous fossil skulls found in the Mediterranean, likely from prehistoric elephants and mammoths, were interpreted as the remains of cyclopes. The skull of a dwarf elephant, which has a large central nasal cavity, looks uncannily like a single giant eye socket. Adrienne Mayer, a historian of science, has documented in careful detail how Greek monster myths track almost exactly onto the fossil deposits in regions where those myths originated. In North America, indigenous peoples of the Great Plains identified large fossil bones as the remains of a great serpent or underwater panther, a creature from the spirit world. The fossils weren't random objects. They were evidence that the spirit world had once physically intersected with this one. Different continents, different languages, different religions. Same fundamental move. The fossil is proof of something beyond ordinary experience. This is where it stops being just interesting and starts being revealing. Because across these cultures, fossils weren't just collected as curiosities. They were used. Shark teeth, some of them millions of years old, were worn as amulets in ancient Egypt. In medieval Europe, they were called tongue stones, and believed to be the petrified tongues of serpents, neutralized by St. Paul after the shipwreck at Malta. They were hung in homes, placed in cups of wine to detect poison, attached to sword handles, worn around the neck. At Stonehenge, researchers found fossil sea urchins deliberately placed inside the monument. These are rounded, star-patterned stones. They're not local. They were brought specifically to that site, specifically for that purpose. In Bronze Age Britain, fossil crinoids, which look like small, perfectly symmetrical stone flowers, were strung as beads and buried with the dead in significant numbers. They were called fairy money, or St. Cuthbert's beads, for centuries after, long after anyone remembered why they mattered. The specific belief changed across time and culture. The underlying behavior did not. Humans kept finding fossils, assigning them power, and incorporating them into the most significant moments of life and death. Imagine you're standing in tall grass 50,000 years ago. You hear a rustle. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe it's a leopard. The human who assumed leopard, who felt a sudden, certain dread and ran, survived long enough to have children. The human who said, "Let me think about this rationally," often didn't. We are descended from the ones who saw meaning in everything, who heard intent in random sounds, who looked at a strange stone and felt immediately that it mattered. That instinct wasn't a mistake. For most of human history, it was the correct response. The fossil didn't need to be understood. It needed to be interpreted. And interpretation, finding meaning in mysterious objects, isn't a primitive error that science eventually fixed. It's what humans are built to do. Then something changed. In the 1600s and 1700s, a new explanatory framework emerged, slowly and with enormous resistance. Niels Steno, a Danish scientist, proposed in 1669 that tongue stones weren't petrified serpent tongues at all. They were shark teeth, and the layers of rock that contained them had been deposited over long periods of time, in a specific order, like pages in a book. This was not a popular idea. It meant the Earth was far older than any religious text suggested. It meant creatures had existed and disappeared long before humans arrived. It meant the planet had a history that no human had witnessed and no scripture described. Mary Anning, in the early 1800s, spent her life extracting these histories from the cliffs of Lyme Regis in England. She found ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, animals that had no name because no living person had ever seen one. Scientists came from across Europe to examine what she pulled out of the stone. The monsters became specimens. The specimens became evidence. The evidence became a new story, one that was longer, stranger, and more intricate than any myth had imagined. For the first time in human history, the fossil wasn't a sign of something beyond the world. It was a record of the world itself. Ancient humans looked at fossils and saw dragons. Modern humans look at fossils and see evolution. Both were attempting to answer the exact same question. What happened here? The story changed completely. The need for a story never did. And that's the thing about science that nobody says out loud. It didn't replace storytelling. It became our newest, most powerful way of doing it.